Carol adjusted her ponytail as she glanced at herself in the hallway mirror, slipping a loose strand of golden hair behind her ear. At 38, she still carried the same sweet, approachable charm that had first caught Edward's attention more than a decade ago. She wore a simple gray pullover, soft and cozy, with nothing flashy about it. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Edward asked, smoothing down his navy tie. At 56, he exuded a quiet strength and poise. Earlier that day, Carol had stepped into the bank intending to handle a routine matter. She had no desire to attract attention, just to complete a quick transaction. But the moment the teller caught sight of her, dressed plainly without a touch of makeup, she was instantly dismissed. "You don't look like someone who belongs here," the teller snapped, her voice laced with disdain. "People like you aren't our priority. The exit is that way." The judgment stung, not because it hurt Carol's pride, but because it was based solely on her appearance. What the teller failed to realize was that this modest woman was married to Edward Simmons, an influential man whose fortune didn't just afford him a luxurious life. He was, in fact, the sole owner of the entire banking institution. Carol took a deep breath and stepped away from the counter, her heart pounding, not from embarrassment, but from sheer disbelief. The woman behind the glass had no idea who she was talking to, no idea what she had just done. Carol didn't raise her voice or argue. She simply turned around and walked toward the large leather chair near the entrance where Edward was waiting. "She said I don't belong here," Carol said quietly, sitting beside him. Edward looked at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood up, straightened his tie, and walked calmly to the counter. "I'd like to speak with your branch manager," he said firmly. The teller frowned. "Sir, this is a busy time. If you don't have a transaction, I'll need to ask you to step aside." "I am here for a transaction," Edward replied coolly. "A very important one, and I won't be speaking to anyone but the manager." There was something in his voice, something commanding and self-assured, that made the teller hesitate. She disappeared through a door behind the counter. Moments later, a man in a navy suit emerged, smiling professionally. "Good afternoon. I'm Robert, the branch manager. How can I help you today?" Edward extended his hand. "Edward Simmons." The manager blinked. "Edward Simmons? As in Simmons Financial Holdings?" Edward nodded once. "That's correct." The manager's face went pale. The teller, who had just returned to her seat, overheard the exchange and froze. "I believe my wife, Carol, was just turned away by your staff," Edward said, his tone still calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "She came in dressed comfortably, with no pretenses, to make a simple deposit. Instead, she was insulted and told she didn't belong." Robert looked visibly shaken. "Mr. Simmons, I deeply apologize. I can assure you this does not reflect our values." "But it does," Edward interrupted, "because it happened. I built this institution to be one where dignity comes before dollars, and here your team is judging people based on sweaters and cosmetics." The teller now looked like she wanted to disappear. Her eyes flicked toward Carol, who sat silently, watching it all unfold. Edward continued, "We have two options. You can dismiss this employee immediately and begin mandatory training across all branches on how to treat customers. Or I can terminate my holdings and close every account I manage through your branch network." Robert was sweating now. "Please, Mr. Simmons, that won't be necessary. I'll handle this personally. She'll be let go by the end of the day, and we'll schedule training starting tomorrow morning." Carol finally stood and walked over, placing a gentle hand on Edward's arm. "Let's not ruin someone's life. A lesson is enough," she said softly. Edward looked at his wife, the same woman who had always reminded him that grace was more powerful than revenge. He sighed and turned back to Robert. "Retrain her. Don't ruin her." The manager nodded quickly. "Absolutely." As they turned to leave, Carol paused. She looked at the teller and said, "You judged me based on what you saw. Next time, try to see a person, not a stereotype." With that, they walked out into the afternoon sun. Edward opened the car door for her, and as she sat inside, he leaned in and kissed her forehead. "You handled that with more class than I ever could," he said. Carol smiled. "That's why you married me, remember?" As the car pulled away from the curb, the teller behind the counter sat motionless, realizing as he had just misjudged the woman who owned half the town.